A woman called my ER one Tuesday morning, not for herself, but to ask about her husband. She said he had been tired for months, heavy after meals, waking up groggy even after a full night's sleep. She assumed it was age. He was 71. Her doctor had shrugged and said the same thing. Age, normal, nothing to worry about. But here is what struck me when she described their daily routine. Every single morning, same breakfast, same foods, same combinations, prepared with care, with love, with the best intentions. And yet those same combinations, repeated daily for years, were quietly working against a body that had changed without either of them noticing. That is what I want to talk about today. Not about exotic superfoods, not about expensive supplements or complicated protocols. I want to talk about something you probably already have in your kitchen, something warm and familiar and deeply underappreciated by most people over 60. Kabocha squash. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. A whole video about squash? Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you is not really about the squash itself. It is about what happens inside your body when you pair certain foods correctly versus incorrectly, specifically after 60. And the science behind this is genuinely interesting. Here is what most people miss. After 60, your body does not process food the same way it did at 40. The gut slows down. Stomach acid production decreases. The enzymes that break down carbohydrates become less efficient. Protein absorption declines. The bacteria in your gut shift. Blood sugar regulation becomes less precise. And these changes do not announce themselves with a dramatic symptom. They creep in quietly. 1 year you feel fine. 3 years later, you cannot explain why mornings feel heavier, why energy drops faster, why the same foods that once energized you now seem to leave you foggy. What nobody tells you is that the same food can help or harm depending entirely on what you eat it with. Kabocha squash is a perfect example of this principle because it interacts meaningfully with several different nutrient categories in ways that matter specifically to older bodies. Today, I am going to walk you through 4 combinations, 2 that work powerfully in your favor, 1 that adds something most people over 60 are quietly becoming deficient in, and 1 that most people think is fine, but is quietly adding a burden your body increasingly struggles to carry. I will give you the mechanism behind each one, because I want you to understand this, not just follow a list. And I will give you 1 practical action for each one, because information without application is just noise. Let us start with what kabocha actually is and why it earns a different conversation than your average winter squash. Kabocha squash, sometimes called Japanese pumpkin, has a glycemic index of around 65 when boiled. That might sound high, but here is what makes it different from regular orange pumpkin, which has a glycemic index of 75 or higher. Kabocha is denser, lower in water content, and higher in fiber per serving. That fiber acts as a physical brake on how fast the sugars hit your bloodstream. It is like the difference between pouring water through an empty pipe and pouring it through a pipe packed with cotton. The cotton slows the flow. For someone over 60, that distinction matters more than most people realize. According to the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, adults over 65 are significantly more likely to experience elevated post-meal blood sugar even without a diabetes diagnosis. In fact, roughly 1 in 3 Americans over 65 has prediabetes, and the majority do not know it. Your blood sugar regulation simply becomes less forgiving with age. But here is the part I want you to stay with. It is not just about the squash alone. It is about what you pair it with. And that changes everything. I want to start here because this is the one that surprised me most when I looked at the research. and it is the one with the most direct impact on how your mornings feel. Think about your gut for a moment as a long, winding river. When you are young, that river runs strong and clear. Nutrients move through efficiently. Bacteria that help you absorb vitamins thrive. The lining of the riverbanks stays intact and permeable in the right ways. But with age, the current slows. Certain bacterial populations shrink. The diversity of the microbiome, which is the community of bacteria living in your gut, begins to narrow. And that narrowing has downstream effects on energy, on immunity, on even mood and cognition. The American Gut Project, which analyzed the microbiomes of over 10,000 adults, found that microbiome diversity consistently declines with age, and that this decline is associated with increased systemic inflammation. Inflammation is the body's alarm system. When it runs quietly in the background without a clear target, it contributes to fatigue, joint stiffness, cognitive slowing, and metabolic inefficiency. Here is where kabocha and plain unsweetened yogurt become an interesting team. Kabocha is rich in prebiotic fiber, specifically the kind that feeds beneficial gut bacteria. Think of this fiber as food for the workers who keep your gut lining healthy. Unsweetened yogurt with live active cultures adds the workers themselves in the form of probiotics like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species. The combination delivers both the food and the workforce simultaneously. A study published in the journal Gut from researchers at King's College London found that pairing prebiotic fiber with probiotic foods produced measurably greater improvements in gut bacterial diversity compared to giving either one alone. The effect was strongest in adults over 60. The researchers described it as a symbiotic effect, where the prebiotic fiber extends and amplifies the activity of the probiotic cultures. Now, I want to be direct about something. A single morning serving of kabocha and yogurt is not going to reverse years of gut imbalance overnight. Your body does not work that way, and I would not insult your intelligence by suggesting it does. What we are talking about is consistent daily signaling. You are giving your gut a message every morning about what it should be doing. Repeated often enough, the message starts to land. But here is the catch that most people miss, and it is a significant one. The word yogurt on the label is not enough. Most flavored yogurts, including many marketed as healthy, contain 8 to 25 grams of added sugar per serving. And kabocha already carries its own natural sweetness from its beta-carotene-rich flesh. When you add a sweetened yogurt on top of that, you are giving your blood sugar 2 sources of rapid rise carbohydrates at the same moment. For a 60-year-old whose insulin response is already slower than it used to be, that is a meaningful added burden. Plain, unsweetened yogurt. That is the key word. If you find it too tart on its own, mash about half a cup of steamed kabocha into the yogurt. The squash's natural sweetness will come through. You do not need sugar. You do not need honey. The combination finds its own balance. From a practical standpoint, steam the kabocha in batches on Sunday. It keeps in the refrigerator for 5 days. In the morning, a scoop of plain Greek yogurt, a scoop of mashed kabocha, and optionally a pinch of cinnamon, which has its own modest blood sugar moderating effect, and you have breakfast that takes less than 3 minutes to assemble. One more note on this combination. Kabocha is rich in beta-carotene, the precursor to vitamin A. The yogurt adds fat because even full fat or 2% yogurt provides enough dietary fat to significantly improve the absorption of fat-soluble compounds like beta-carotene. Without fat, much of that beta-carotene passes through you unused. The yogurt makes the combination more than the sum of its parts. Let me tell you about a pattern I noticed repeatedly in my clinical work. People who came in with memory concerns, word finding difficulties, that frustrating feeling of reaching for a thought and finding nothing there, often had something in common when I looked at their diet histories. Not a dramatic deficiency, not a missing vitamin in some scandalous quantity, but a persistent, decades-long imbalance in the ratio of two types of dietary fat, omega-6 fatty acids versus omega-3 fatty acids. Your brain is roughly 60% fat. The quality of that fat matters enormously for how your neurons fire, how inflammation is regulated in brain tissue, and how the protective myelin sheath around your nerve fibers maintains itself. In a healthy body, the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 in a diet should be somewhere around 4-1, or ideally even lower. The average American diet today runs at a ratio closer to 20-1 in favor of omega-6. Not because people are eating badly, necessarily, but because the processed food supply, vegetable oils, and commercially raised animal products are all very high in omega-6, and the natural sources of omega-3 have largely disappeared from everyday eating. According to a large-scale analysis published in the Journal of Nutrition by researchers at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, adults over 60 who had the lowest omega-3 intake had measurably faster rates of cognitive decline over a 10-year follow-up period compared to those in the highest omega-3 quartile. The difference was not small. It was a 34% difference in the rate of memory-related decline. Here is where walnuts enter the picture. Walnuts are one of the richest plant sources of ALA, which is alpha-linolenic acid, a type of omega-3 that your body can partially convert into the longer chain omega-3S, DHA, and EPA that your brain tissue preferentially uses. They are not as efficient as fatty fish at delivering omega-3 in the ready-to-use form. But for people who do not eat fish regularly or who are looking for a daily sustainable source, walnuts are one of the most practical options available. Here is the critical detail. 1 ounce of walnuts, which is roughly a small handful, about 7 whole walnuts, provides approximately 2.5 grams of ALA. The dietary reference intake for omega-3 in adults over 50 is 1.6 grams per day for men and 1.1 grams per day for women. 1 small handful of walnuts gets you there. Now, here is why this combination with kabocha specifically is interesting. Kabocha is high in complex carbohydrates and moderate in fiber. When you eat it alone, it provides a steady release of energy. When you eat it with walnuts, something additional happens. The fat content in the walnuts further slows the glucose absorption from the squash. You get an even longer, flatter blood sugar curve, less of a rise and less of a subsequent drop. For older adults who experience afternoon fatigue or energy crashes, this matters. There is also a second mechanism at work. Kabocha is rich in lutein and zeaxanthin, carotenoids that accumulate in the retina and protect against macular degeneration, which is the leading cause of vision loss in adults over 60 in the United States. According to the National Eye Institute, macular degeneration affects roughly 11 million Americans. These carotenoids are fat soluble. Without adequate dietary fat present at the same meal, the absorption is poor. The fat in walnuts dramatically improves their uptake. Think of it this way. The kabocha loads the nutrients onto the delivery truck. The fat from the walnuts provides the fuel to actually drive the truck to its destination. Without the fat, the truck sits in the parking lot. Practical note on walnuts. Crush them if chewing is a concern. Blend them into a paste if needed. The nutrient profile is identical. Mix the crushed walnuts into warm, steamed kabocha, and you have something that takes 1 minute to prepare and delivers 3 distinct benefits simultaneously. Blood sugar stability, omega-3 intake, enhanced carotenoid absorption. And one more thing, walnuts also contain melatonin, polyphenols, and tryptophan. There is a reasonable body of evidence suggesting that regular walnut consumption is associated with better sleep quality in older adults. Sleep quality in your 60s and 70s is not a luxury issue. It is a metabolic issue, an immune issue, a cardiovascular issue, and a cognitive issue all at once. Poor sleep accelerates nearly every age-related health decline we know of. So if this combination helps you sleep a little better 2 or 3 nights after becoming a regular habit, that is not a coincidence. That is biology. This is the one I feel most strongly about. And it is the one where the gap between what most people over 60 are doing and what their body actually needs is widest. There is a slow, quiet erosion that begins around age 50 and accelerates in your 60s and 70s. It does not hurt. It does not announce itself, but it is one of the primary drivers of fall risk: hospital readmission rates, loss of independence, and what geriatric medicine calls frailty syndrome. It is muscle loss, specifically the progressive age-related loss of muscle mass and strength known as sarcopenia. Here is the part most people do not know. According to the American Society for Nutrition, adults over 65 lose approximately 1 to 2% of their total muscle mass every year if they do not actively counteract it. And that rate increases after 70. By the time someone reaches 80, they may have lost 30 to 40% of the peak muscle mass they had in their prime. That is not just a cosmetic issue. Muscle is metabolically active tissue. It burns glucose like an engine. It provides structural support to joints. It powers balance and the small corrective movements that keep you from falling when you step off a curb unexpectedly. It generates the core strength that makes getting out of a chair easy or difficult. The people who maintain their independence into their 80s, who still live at home, still drive, still do their own grocery shopping, invariably have more functional muscle mass than those who lose it. Here is where the nutrition story gets important. Muscle repair and maintenance require protein. But the story is more specific than just eat more protein. After age 65, your body becomes less efficient at extracting amino acids from the protein you eat and directing them into muscle synthesis. This is called anabolic resistance. What this means, practically, is that an older adult needs more protein per meal to trigger the same amount of muscle protein synthesis as a younger person. According to research published in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, older adults need a minimum of 25 to 30 grams of protein per meal to reliably overcome the anabolic resistance threshold and stimulate muscle rebuilding. This is a specific and somewhat surprising finding. It is not just about daily protein intake. It is about per meal protein delivery. Getting 15 grams at breakfast, 10 at lunch, and 30 at dinner does not work as well as spreading it more evenly. Tofu is one of the most practical, high-protein foods available for older adults who may have reduced appetites, dental changes, or difficulty chewing tougher protein sources. A half cup of firm tofu contains roughly 10 to 12 grams of protein. Combined with kabocha, which provides the complex carbohydrates for energy, the fiber for gut support, and the beta carotene for immune and visual health, you have a meal combination that addresses three different nutritional gaps simultaneously. Silken tofu or soft tofu, if swallowing is a concern, provides roughly the same protein with a texture that is far easier to manage. Mashed into warm kabocha with a little low sodium broth, it creates something warm, easy to eat, and surprisingly filling. There is a second reason this combination matters, and it relates to a specific amino acid called leucine. Leucine is the primary trigger for muscle protein synthesis. Think of it as the light switch. You need a certain amount of leucine in a meal to flip the switch from rest mode to build mode in your muscles. Tofu and soy protein generally has one of the highest leucine concentrations among plant proteins, not as high as whey protein or eggs, but significantly higher than most other plant-based sources. When you pair that leucine-rich protein with the slow-release carbohydrates from kabocha, you support the transport of those amino acids into muscle tissue more effectively. Carbohydrates trigger a small insulin response, and insulin, despite its reputation in some circles, is actually a powerful driver of amino acid uptake into muscle cells when it is present in appropriate amounts at the right time. I want to pause here for a moment because this is the combination where I would most strongly encourage you to think about frequency. Once a week is nice. 3 to 4 times a week is where it starts to create a measurable difference, not because any single meal is miraculous, but because muscle maintenance is a daily conversation between your nutrition and your biology. You cannot catch up on 2 months of deficient protein intake with one large steak on Sunday. The conversation needs to be regular. If anyone in your life, a parent, a sibling, a friend, is starting to have difficulty getting up from a chair or is losing weight they were not trying to lose, please share this section with them. Muscle loss is silent but consequential, and it is far more reversible in its early stages than most people realize. Now, I want to shift to a different kind of conversation, not about what to add, but about what to be more thoughtful about. Because this is where I see a consistent pattern in older adults who feel like they are eating reasonably well, but cannot explain why their energy is flat, why their stomach feels heavy after meals, or why their blood sugar numbers keep drifting in a direction they did not expect. Let me start with sweetened combinations. Kabocha has a natural sweetness from its dense beta-carotene-rich flesh. That sweetness is real, and it is built on a carbohydrate foundation that already requires some blood sugar management. When people pair kabocha with ice cream, caramel sauce, sweetened condensed milk desserts, or even honey in large quantities, they are adding a rapid rise sugar source on top of a moderate glycemic food. The image I want you to hold in your mind is this. Your pancreas, specifically the beta cells that produce insulin, functions like a thermostat. When blood sugar rises, the thermostat clicks on and releases insulin to bring it back down. When you are young, the thermostat is sensitive and fast. It detects the rise early and responds quickly. After 60, the thermostat slows. It takes longer to detect the rise, longer to respond. And by the time the response arrives, blood sugar has climbed higher and stayed elevated longer than it would have in a younger body. This prolonged post-meal elevation, called postprandial hyperglycemia, is increasingly recognized as a driver of vascular damage even in people without a formal diabetes diagnosis. The American Diabetes Association now explicitly acknowledges that blood sugar spikes after meals are independently associated with increased cardiovascular risk, regardless of fasting glucose levels. Adding dense sugar to an already moderate glycemic food is not a catastrophic event on any single occasion. Nobody's going to damage themselves with a scoop of ice cream at a birthday dinner. The problem is daily repetition. If kabocha, paired with heavy sweeteners, is Tuesday's lunch and Thursday's dessert and Saturday's afternoon snack, that accumulated post-meal burden becomes significant over weeks and months. This is not about perfection. I am not asking you to give up pleasure. The kabocha dessert at a family gathering, the sweetened pumpkin soup at Thanksgiving, these are moments of connection and enjoyment, and they matter. What I am suggesting is a different category system. Sweetened kabocha as an occasional food rather than a daily pairing. Plain kabocha as the daily default. Now, for the second concern, deeply fried preparations. Kabocha tempura, fried kabocha chips, kabocha fritters, all delicious, all deeply problematic when consumed regularly by adults over 60. And here is the mechanism. When food is deep fried, it absorbs oil at a rate that depends on the food's surface area and moisture content. Kabocha, because of its dense, starchy flesh, actually absorbs a significant amount of frying oil. What you end up with is a food that combines rapid release carbohydrates from the squash with a very high load of dietary fat, often in the form of omega-6 rich vegetable oils like soybean or canola, taken in at the same moment. Your liver, which processes dietary fat before it enters general circulation, handles large fat loads less efficiently with age. Hepatic fat clearance slows. The risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is quiet accumulation of fat in liver cells, increases with age and with repeated high-fat meal exposure. According to data from the American Association for the Study of Liver Diseases, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease affects approximately 25% of adults in the United States, with prevalence rising sharply after age 50. This matters beyond liver function alone. A sluggish liver means slower processing of fats in the bloodstream, longer lasting elevation of triglycerides after meals, and greater oxidative stress on vascular tissue. There is also a practical, immediate consequence that many people notice but do not connect to mechanism. Heavy fried meals take longer to leave the stomach. The technical term is gastric emptying, and it slows with age anyway. When you add a large fat load, you are asking a system that is already moving more slowly to process something that requires significant digestive work. The result is that post-meal heaviness, that bloated, sluggish feeling 2 hours after lunch that you attribute to getting older. Sometimes it is age. Sometimes it is the food asking more of the body than the body can comfortably deliver. Here is the practical reframe. Kabocha does not need to be fried to be satisfying. Roasted at 400 degrees with a small amount of olive oil and a pinch of salt, it develops a natural caramelization that creates deep, complex flavor. Steamed and mashed, it has a richness that needs nothing added. Simmered in broth, it absorbs savory flavor and becomes something genuinely warming. The cooking method is not a sacrifice. It is a different kind of pleasure that happens to cost your body far less to process. I want to add something here that the original conversation about kabocha almost never includes, and it changes how you should think about preparation. The nutrients in kabocha are not all equally stable. Different cooking methods have dramatically different effects on what survives and what gets destroyed. Beta-carotene, kabocha's most abundant and arguably most important nutrient, is heat stable and actually increases in bioavailability when the squash is cooked. The heat breaks down the cell walls surrounding the carotenoid molecules, releasing them from their fibrous matrix and making them far easier to absorb. This is one of the cases where cooking genuinely improves nutritional value rather than diminishing it. Vitamin C, however, is water-soluble and heat-sensitive, Kabocha contains a meaningful amount. When you boil kabocha in a large pot of water and discard the cooking liquid, you are discarding a significant fraction of that vitamin C along with it. Steaming, which keeps the squash out of direct contact with water, preserves substantially more vitamin C. Roasting also preserves more than boiling. The practical takeaway: if gut health and immune support are your priorities, steam or roast kabocha rather than boiling it in large amounts of water. If you do boil it, keep the cooking liquid and use it as the base for a soup or broth. Do not pour the nutrients down the drain. There is also the question of the skin. Many people peel kabocha before cooking. The skin is edible, particularly on younger, thinner skin varieties. The skin contains higher concentrations of certain phenolic compounds, plant-based antioxidants that help regulate inflammation. If you are cooking it in a way where the texture of the skin would be tolerable, leaving it on adds a layer of nutritional value that peeling removes. And there is one more cooking consideration that matters specifically for blood sugar management. The glycemic index of kabocha is not fixed. It changes based on how long you cook it. Starch in the squash exists in two forms: crystalline starch, which is digested slowly, and gelatinized starch, which is digested quickly. Heat converts crystalline starch to gelatinized starch. The longer and more intensely you cook kabocha, the higher the glycemic impact becomes. Kabocha, that is lightly steamed until just tender, has a meaningfully lower glycemic effect than kabocha that is cooked until it is completely soft and falling apart. For someone managing blood sugar, this is not a trivial distinction. The practical rule is cook it until it is done, not until it is overdone. Slightly firm is better than completely mushy for blood sugar management. While still being soft enough to be easily digestible, I want to take a moment and step back from the specific combinations, because there is a broader pattern I want you to notice. Many adults over 60 experience a cluster of symptoms that they attribute to normal aging: morning heaviness, post-meal fatigue, inconsistent energy, slow digestion, difficulty maintaining weight, either gaining it without changing eating habits or losing it without intending to, increasing joint discomfort, catching colds more frequently than they used to. None of these are inevitable. Some of them are genuinely related to aging in ways that cannot be fully reversed. But many of them are related to the accumulated micro effects of daily dietary patterns that no longer match what the body needs at 65 or 70. Your body is not broken. It has changed. And what worked at 40 may not be optimized for where you are now. The framework I want you to carry away from this conversation is this: after 60, the body has specific increased needs for prebiotic fiber, adequate protein per meal, specific types of dietary fat, and food combinations that support rather than burden a digestive system that has slowed. Meeting those needs is not complicated. It does not require a complete overhaul of how you eat. It requires attention to a handful of specific adjustments repeated consistently. Kabocha squash is useful here precisely because it is versatile, accessible, affordable, and genuinely nutritious in ways that map onto the specific needs of older bodies. It is not a miracle food, nothing is, but it is a particularly good fit for this stage of life when used thoughtfully. A practical question: how do you know if these changes are making a difference? I want to give you a simple self-monitoring framework that does not require any special equipment or lab tests. For the first 2 weeks of incorporating these combinations regularly, pay attention to 4 things. Write them down if that helps. First, morning energy. Not just whether you slept, but how you feel within the first 30 minutes of waking. Is there a quality to that feeling, a readiness or a heaviness that you can describe and track? Second, post-meal feeling. At 2 hours, not immediately after eating, but 2 hours later, do you feel stable or do you feel a dip? Third, bowel regularity and consistency. Not a glamorous subject, but a direct and sensitive indicator of gut function. Fourth, afternoon energy between 2 and 4 p.m. This is when blood sugar management most visibly affects functional capacity. You are not looking for a dramatic transformation in 2 weeks. You are looking for a directional shift, a morning that feels 5% lighter, a post-meal energy curve that holds a little longer, a gut that feels a little more settled. If those shifts appear, you are getting information. Your body is telling you something. The combination is working. If nothing changes, you also have information. Something else may need attention. These are the kinds of patterns that are worth bringing to your doctor, not as a dramatic complaint, but as data. Keeping a simple food and symptom log for 2 weeks gives your physician far more useful information than a general statement of feeling tired. There is a belief I encounter constantly, and I want to address it directly before we close, because it shapes how people make food decisions in ways that are often unhelpful. The belief goes like this: if something is natural and traditional, it must be healthy. And the corollary, if something is familiar and easy, it probably is not doing much. Both of these are wrong. Deep frying is ancient and traditional. So is excessive salt. So is cooking everything in lard. Traditional does not mean appropriate for your body at this stage of life. And simplicity is almost always the point. The 3 combinations I walked you through today, yogurt and kabocha, walnuts and kabocha, tofu and kabocha, are not complicated. They do not require special equipment, unusual ingredients, or significant cooking skill. They are simple pairings that happen to be backed by a coherent biological rationale. I would also push back on one more thing. The idea that healthy eating after 60 has to be restrictive, joyless, or separate from the food culture and traditions you love, it does not. The goal is not to eliminate the foods you enjoy. The goal is to build a daily default that supports your body so that the occasions when you eat fried food or a sweetened dessert or a richer meal are genuinely pleasurable moments of choice rather than daily habits working quietly against you. 1 scoop of ice cream at a grandchild's birthday party. Enjoy it completely, savor it. That is not a health problem. A bowl of sweetened kabocha pudding every morning for 3 years without understanding what it is doing to your post-meal blood sugar, that is worth understanding and adjusting. The distinction is not restriction. The distinction is awareness. And awareness, consistently applied, is the most powerful health tool available to you. Let me close with the thing that actually matters most to me in this conversation. When I worked in emergency medicine, the cases that stayed with me were not the dramatic, acute presentations. They were the slower ones. The 73-year-old who came in because she had fallen getting out of the bathtub. The 78-year-old who was so fatigued he could no longer drive to see his grandchildren. The 81-year-old whose cognitive slowing had become severe enough that her family was discussing a care facility. None of those situations appeared suddenly. All of them were the endpoint of quiet, accumulated processes that had been building for years. And in the history of each of those patients, there were windows earlier in time when different choices might have changed the trajectory, not reversed everything, not guaranteed a different outcome, but meaningfully altered the slope This is what I want you to take from this video. Not a sense of urgency or alarm, not a list of rules to follow perfectly, but a different relationship with what you eat and why it matters. Your independence is worth protecting. Your ability to live in your own home, to drive your own car, to cook your own meals, to spend time with the people you love without depending on others for your basic function, that is worth more than any supplement, any medication, any intervention that happens after the problem has already arrived. The daily food decisions you make are either quietly investing in that independence or quietly withdrawing from it. There is no neutral. There is no plateau where nothing changes. But here is the genuinely hopeful part, and I want to land on this because I mean it. The investments required are not large. A serving of plain yogurt and kabocha instead of a sweetened one, a handful of walnuts added to something you were already eating, tofu in the soup a few more times each week, steaming instead of frying as the default. These are not heroic acts. They are small, repeatable decisions that collectively tilt a very long game in your favor. And because you are watching this, because you are curious and engaged and taking your own health seriously, you are already the kind of person who can make them stick. You do not need to start with all of them. Pick one, the one that feels most relevant to where you are right now. Try it for 2 weeks with some consistency and some attention. See what your body tells you. That is how this works. Not transformation. Conversation. Let me bring this together into something you can carry with you. Kabocha squash, when paired thoughtfully, becomes a genuinely useful tool for the specific challenges that bodies over 60 face. Here is the framework in 4 points. 1. Kabocha with plain unsweetened yogurt. Prebiotic fiber from the squash, probiotic cultures from the yogurt. Together, they support gut diversity, which in turn supports energy, immunity, and cognitive function. Key detail, plain yogurt only. The fat in the yogurt also dramatically improves your absorption of the beta carotene in the squash. This is the morning combination. 2. Kabocha with walnuts. Moderate glycemic food paired with omega-3 rich fat creates a flatter, longer blood sugar curve. The fat in walnuts improves carotenoid absorption from the squash. The omega-3 in walnuts supports the brain health and vascular function that protect against the cognitive and cardiovascular decline most adults over 60 are most concerned about. One small handful, that is all it takes. 3. Kabocha with tofu, the protein case. Muscle loss after 60 is silent, significant, and more preventable than most people realize. Tofu provides leucine-rich plant protein. The complex carbohydrates in kabocha support amino acid uptake into muscle tissue. 25 to 30 grams of protein per meal, not per day, is what the research suggests older adults need to overcome the anabolic resistance that comes with age. This combination helps you get there. 4. What to moderate. Sweetened pairings add blood sugar burden to a body whose insulin response has already slowed. Fried preparations add fat burden to a digestive and metabolic system that has slowed. Neither needs to be eliminated. Both deserve a more occasional than daily relationship. And the cooking detail. Steaming or roasting preserves more nutrients than boiling. Slightly firmer is better than overcooked for blood sugar management. The skin is edible and worth keeping when possible. If you remember one thing, let it be this. The body over 60 does not need dramatic intervention. It needs consistent, gentle support. Daily, small choices that speak the right language to a system that is still fully capable of responding. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is almost never closed in a single dramatic moment. It is closed in Tuesday's breakfast and Thursday's lunch, and 100 small decisions made with a little more understanding than before. You have that understanding now. That is not nothing. That is the beginning of something. I will see you in the next one.